Good morning. This is Grassroots Rising, and I'm your host, Jimmy Skogard. Today I want to talk about the illusion of justice, what money buys. The appearance of action is the most effective substitute for it. On the morning of September 3rd, 2025, a group of survivors walked to the steps of the United States Capitol. Survivors had flown in from different states, survivors carrying the weight of decades. Survivors stood in front of the cameras and asked Congress to do one simple thing: open the files, the Epstein files. 3.5 million pages held by the Department of Justice, records of trafficking of victims and men and institutions that had escaped accountability while the survivors had lived with the wreckage. Congress responded that same day, sort of. What the House did, they passed a resolution. On September 3rd, it was called House Resolution 668. It directed the House Oversight Committee to continue its investigation into how federal government handled the Jeffrey Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell cases. It required the committee to release its own records. It looked like a response. But House Resolution 668 was never voted on directly. It was passed by being folded into House Resolution 672, a procedural rule whose primary purpose was to govern debate on the FY 2026 Energy and Water Appropriations Act. In sections 8 through 10 of that rule, 3 unrelated resolutions were deemed automatically passed the moment the rule itself was adopted. Members cast one vote, 212 to 208 along party lines. In that single vote, members set the debate terms for an energy spending bill, passed the Epstein investigation resolution, passed a January 6th subcommittee resolution, and killed a competing Epstein transparency measure by tabling it. Not one of those resolutions received its own vote. Representative Massey, who had spent months pushing for real disclosure, called House Resolution 668 what it was, kind of fake. It carried no force of law beyond the House. It set no deadline for the Department of Justice. It gave the Oversight Committee full discretion over what to release and when. The survivors who stood on the Capitol steps that morning were handed the appearance of a response. This mechanism has a name. What happened on September 3rd is called a self-executing rule. It is a technique the House Rules Committee uses to attach actions to a procedural vote so those actions never require a separate recorded vote. In this case, the Rules Committee, controlled by the Republican majority, chose this vehicle over the alternative, the massive CONA bill, the Epstein Files Transparency Act. It had bipartisan support and actual legal force. That bill would have required DOJ to open the files by law. Democrats on the Rules Committee offered 2 amendments during the September 2nd markup. One to add contempt of Congress authority to the DOJ noncompliance, and one to bring the Massey-Connor bill directly to the floor. Both failed 4-9 on party lines in committee. Leadership chose the weaker path and built a procedure around it. What did that cost? 2 months. The Epstein Files Transparency Act did not pass the House until November 18th, 2025. It cleared the Senate the following day and was signed into law on November 19th. The vote was 427 to 1. That number deserves to sit with us for a moment. 427 to 1. When members faced a direct recorded vote on transparency, the resistance collapsed. Every tool used between September 3rd and November 18th, the procedural bundling, the committee bottleneck, the lack of a deadline, served one purpose: delay. The discharge petition that finally forced the vote needed 218 signatures. It took months to build that pressure. The DOJ ultimately released 3.5 million pages in compliance with the law, heavily redacted. The survivors who stood on the Capitol steps in September got an answer in November. That answer had been available all along. Our representative, Harriet Hageman, voted to delay and still votes with the majority to obfuscate, to hide what is in these files. I served in the Wyoming Army National Guard. When mistakes were made, no one wanted to own the mistake. A saying sometimes circulated quietly amongst the ranks, "Oh, just give it a week, and it'll just go away." It was a whip, but it was also a strategy. Delay long enough and the urgency fades. The press moves on. The public forgets. The people who were harmed are still harmed, but the moment for accountability passes. What Congress did on September 3rd was the institutional version of that quip. The survivors who showed up that day had already waited long enough. Survivors deserve better than a vote on an energy bill that happened to contain somewhere in the fine print the appearance of justice. When one vote covers three unrelated actions at once, what are we actually authorizing? If 427 members were ready to vote yes in November, what was the September procedure actually protecting? This episode asked for one specific act. Call Representative Hageman's office this week and ask one direct question. Why was a real standalone vote on Epstein transparency in front of Congress on September 3rd, 2025, delayed when the final vote was 427 to 1 in November? Then share the answer or the silence with 5 neighbors. Power counts on delay. Power counts on confusion. Money, big money, counts on us moving on. Let's not move on. Let's continue to ask the questions. Let's share our answers and keep the pressure on, because agency means the ability to decide our future for ourselves. We still hold that power, but only if we use it. Our children and our grandchildren's legacy is in our hands now. You join the movement with me at skogard2026.org. Thank you for your time. I'll talk to you tomorrow.